So we shall begin this promo scene, my friend. Um, so your character's name is Zacharias Westenholt is his name privately. But since his time in Duskfall, he has started to go by the name of Carver. How do you say the last name?
Bouchier.
Bouchier? Okay, Bouchier. And that's since coming to Duskfall. But for now, as we've discussed, we're going to focus in on a different moment in your character's history. Rather than talking about his experiences so far in Duskfall or a specific moment in Duskfall, I think a very important moment for your character, as you've expressed to me and we've talked about, is why your character, or at least a taste of why your character is the way that he is. And so I think we're going to focus on that in this scene, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna get right into it, basically. We begin on a train that travels like many other trains do across the vast, separated continents of all of the Akros Empire. All of these masses of land are like massive continents connected in a giant island chain almost. And since the rise of the empire and the rise of technology, the rise of Leviathan blood being transferred into ectoplasm, the rise of the knowledge of how to ward off spirits and demons and ghosts and creatures, a massive train system has been built across the land. You find yourself, as many have before, on a train traveling to Duskfall. At this point, you're days away, you've been told. Traveling across the vast wasteland, through the, uh, the lands that encompass the wilds between the greater cities that have lightning barriers themselves, which are the huge Tesla coil like towers of crackling lightning and light that ward away ghosts and spirits from the towns that they offer safe harbor to. You've been on this train for some time, and as with the technology that I spoke of, the trains themselves carry wards that have been placed over them from having learned over time. Wards can be placed across the trains and mixtures of technology added in order to ward away spirits and creatures and things of that nature. And so train travel is very, actually very, very safe. Um, you've been traveling on this train for several days now, and you find yourself there with your family, your wife, and your children. Um, Being a person of wealth historically, you were able to rent a train car mostly to yourself. At least a box, a larger box area. You know how train have those sort of compartments for people, and they can rent those. So you rented a much larger one that has a little bit more space. It's very comfortable. It basically has pull-down beds or mattresses that can be set up. And currently, you and your wife are just sort of enjoying looking out the window, sort of cuddled close to each other, and your children are fast asleep. Um, as the day, the bleak part of the day of only a few hours, as you see in Duskfall, sort of is fading away, and darkness is starting to overtake the desert. Um, you find yourself sort of drifting into sleep as you do. The train travel itself has sort of affected your normal sleep cycle as it would be, especially because you can't get up and move too much. You're able to travel down to sort of the lounge car and things of that nature. So, you've gone down there for meals or you've had meals delivered in. And it's sort of an experience that is only temporary, right? And so you're ready for your future endeavor that you're planning when you visit Duskfall. Um, and as you drift off into sleep, you dream of a beautiful city. You dream of vast towers. You dream of a city bathed in light and sunshine. You see yourself walking through the vast streets, the beautiful streets of bright stone. You imagine potentially a very nice manor that you may purchase with your family. At least, even if you choose not to live here permanently or live in Duskfall permanently, it's at least a nice vacation home for when you do travel here and perhaps do business. You find yourself in that dream, and as the dream changes slowly. You hear a sound in your dream, a ringing, a bell. The vast cathedral, the vast bellwether crematorium-like cathedral rings off in the distance of your mind. You hear it ringing its sound like death. You hear the birds and the crows cawing in the distance, growing ever closer to you. And there's a moment, a shake. You feel a shake, and as you awake, you see fire spreading through the open door of the train. You hear vast screams, a vacuum of wind. You notice the top of the train car is open, askew. You find yourself holding on just barely as you quickly reach down to the chair. You don't see your family close by. You're holding on as the train is, as the portion of the carriage that you're in is now been ripped apart by some sort of explosion. There's fire everywhere, and as you grip, you notice that there is blood trickling down your arms, over your body. You seem to have taken some sort of wounds, and that pain starts to set in. And as you grip harder, trying to hold on, eventually your strength fails you, and you're thrust by that vacuum of air rushing by at super high speeds. You're sucked out of the train. Holding on as much as you can, you cut your hand as you reach towards the fragments of the train that are sharp, holding on for dear life, and then eventually you can't hold on any longer. Your muscles give out, and you go flying into the darkness of the night, hitting and skidding across the sand like a stone across water. Just smack, 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 until you eventually roll. You feel your body battered and bruised. You believe perhaps some of your bones, your ribs at least, may be broken. You find yourself laying face down in the dust and the dirt, the sand, really, of the desert. And you sort of breathe in as blood is trickling. The warm trickle of blood is now pooling across your face and falling down, and darkness takes you. When you wake up, for a moment, you're waking up in little moments. It's no longer night. It seems like light is slowly starting to come, and you see motion around you. You're able to find your strength for a moment, sort of get yourself up, at least sitting. You find you're sitting near some sort of rocks or something. You're able to lean up towards them or move yourself, scoot towards them, and sit up. You see in the distance smoke rising like a plume miles away beyond sight. You can't even see the train anymore. All you see is fragments on the ground of what may have been portions of the train compartment lying scattered throughout the sand. You feel for a moment that you don't remember seeing your family. You don't remember if they were in the explosion or not as you woke up. You remember hearing screams and cries, but you're not sure if they survived or not. But it sort of sets in for a moment as you start thinking about what you can remember. The vastness of what seemed like the explosion and damage that was done. You're unsure, and you hope that they survived. That you didn't see them, or in the area that you were in, perhaps they did survive. You're unsure. But this somberness sort of sets into you, the sadness, as you start to worry, anxiety overtaking you, fear and sadness. That fear of your family passing starts to boil in you and turns to rage and anger. You want to lash out, or you feel like, like how that is, like when you start to feel sad. What do you think? How do you feel like your character would feel? Please. I don't want to tell you how your character feels because it's your character.
thinking back on not seeing his family in the immediate area, he'd probably be stuck in those moments where he becomes lucid enough to speak that he might start calling their names in some sort of attempt to figure out if they're close by, or maybe hoping that they found their way to him. After a while, if he receives no response, which I'm assuming is the case, he probably starts losing the little bits of hope that he has in his heart for them being at least close by. And he probably starts to slowly admit what reality is around him. And as that happens, he probably becomes very somber and very, very inflected.
In those times that he wakes up, he presumably tries to stop what bleeding he can from his body in order to continue to survive. That need for survival becoming important. I'll presume that he's lashed down and tried to cover up his wounds as best he can, so he's just not openly bleeding out or something of that nature. And as he has done that, and he starts to gain a bit of his strength, he notices something amongst the rubble, in a sense, the scattered remains of the part of the train that also fell out of the train when they did. And he notices something that sort of draws his eye in the distance, probably 50 yards away, something of that nature.
So he sees an object out in the distance?
Yeah, like amongst the rubble. He sees something that sort of catches his eye and catches the sun for a second. Like a glint of light.
Abandoning his pain, he'll just run forward, like hopeful that it's something that that will either alleviate his fears regarding his family, or perhaps something that would aid him. And
okay.
He'll rush forward.
Yeah. He heads forward to the rubble, pushing himself, forcing away the pain, and he finds under what looks like a portion of the metallic train, a section of fragment. He finds a toy, a toy that belonged to one of his children. It seems burnt, somewhat charred on one side, like it was caught in fire. But he sees no remains of his family or anything of that nature.
I think he'll start looking around, kind of calling out for them, like just kind of madly hoping that they're nearby, because this is a sign to him that they're at least close.
Yeah. So he's yelling and he's screaming to the skies. He's and as time passes, as he continues yelling, there's no response. There's no one here. It's just him and these scattered remnants of what had happened to him. As I said, in the distance, he can still see, especially in the light, a plume of smoke miles and miles away along the train track. Farther, he sees that there are remnants and pieces of what seem like portions scattered throughout this area, leading back hundreds of yards, surrounding the train track, like rocks that had been thrust aside. Vast pieces of the train, metal, cloth, the things the mattresses were made of and chairs were made of, wood, splinters, all sorts of things.
He'll clutch the toy, like almost with like this furious vigor, holding on to it with every last bit of hope that he has. And he'll continue forward, assuming that if he can follow the wreckage, that he might eventually find his family.
So he finds himself traveling along the train line, and although he has bandaged himself, the loss of blood does weigh on him. He feels weakened. He feels like he's, that sort of shock feeling of what happens to you when you're wounded. He feels shock sort of setting in the way that you do, where you start to feel sort of lighter and you start to feel a little woozy and you're just like sort of losing, but he continues pushing on. He continues pushing on one step after another until he can barely keep moving, until he can barely keep walking. And yet that feeling, that sadness, that anger now, as you had said before when we talked about it, that the sadness turns, especially in the case of Carver, the sadness turns to anger. It's how he deals with things, if I'm correct, right? And that anger boils. He starts to want to blame people. He starts to want to blame his family, not those who had passed, perhaps, or maybe yes, even them who passed. He's angry. He wants to know that they're alive. He wants to know that they're okay. He wants to hurt and harm whoever did this to him and his family. He wants to hurt and harm whoever's responsible, and that anger boils in him. The the brightest portion of the day over his head, beating down its warmth, what little warmth there is in these lands. Um, Sweat and frustration overtake him.
I think he'll probably, with the anger and everything too, just overtaking him, he'll drop down to his knees and just start pounding his fist into the dust.
Okay. So he falls down to his knees, just frustrated, angry, yelling, presumably, maybe even to the heavens themselves, to whoever who will listen. He's screaming their names. He's lost in that emotion, and then eventually his vision fades, and he falls into darkness. Dreams coming to him. He hears whispers. He hears screams. And in the distance, he sees in his vision a bead of light. It grows and slowly starts to become a shape. That shape slowly changing until it eventually seems familiar. It seems like a person, perhaps. He doesn't see a face, he just sees a shape. A humanoid shape, small and distant, it seems like. He hears a whisper in his dream, almost like it's on the wind itself. And as he wakes, as he hears that whisper slowly kind of overtake his ears, he finds himself awake, laying on his back. He notices that there is movement around him. He's being carried somehow, it seems. And as he sort of turns his gaze to look, what does he do in that moment?
Oh, very curious. He'll turn around and do his best to look and try and see who's carrying him.
He sees a person, a few people, in fact, all wearing older, rugged garments, like almost like frontiers people. So sort of things that are do well in the heat of this desert and this wasteland, but at the same time still rugged. So like probably like canvas sort of clothing in that sort of thing, or perhaps especially in the sun, they're covering themselves up to allow their skin to breathe, to allow for they're not getting overheated. But you can tell they're carrying tools on their bodies, belts. You see weapons, like blades and sort of like a crossbow on one of their backs, a sort of rickshaw put together crossbow. And then on one specific person, you notice that they have a few different finer items. It looks like they have a very nice looking blade on the back of their hip that he can see. And they are wearing like masks that seem to be mixed with cloth to kind of cover their faces from the sand, as though like sandstorms or something of that nature. They're wearing like goggles in order to protect their eyes, but a few of them have those goggles picked up onto their heads. They're speaking Akarosian, which is sort of the common tongue of the Empire. And one of them that's walking, because he sees Carver sees that there's two walking on either side of him, and there's one that's carrying what looks like holding some sort of like two long logs almost, with a cloth set between them, and he's being dragged, and he can see the lines out behind him through the sand of the drag marks of him being dragged. He doesn't even see the train tracks anymore. He can see perhaps the fragments a little bit shining in the sun, or in the light, in the dim light of the morning, far off in the distance.
He kind of looks to see if he can discern a direction of the smoke.
He can't see the smoke at this point in time. It's either potentially behind him because he's sort of propped up on this thing and he can only see one direction. So it's perhaps behind him, maybe, or maybe it's just gone at this point. One of the men, or the people walking next to him, who sounds like they have a rougher, gruffer voice, looks over and sees him sort of looking around. It's like, he woke up.
You're not cannibals, are you?
Cannibals? No. We wouldn't eat you. Plus, you don't really look like you'd be that tasty, let's be real.
I think that much we can agree on. Where am I?
You, my friend, are in the Deathlands.
Were there any others?
Any others? Oh,
survivors.
Didn't see anyone. We found pieces, but the crows and the creatures had already got to them, so they were gone. You're lucky, though. All that racket and screaming, we heard you at a distance. We found you near the train tracks.
That racket and screaming's what saved me?
Yes, all your yelling. You were yelling. We heard you.
Where are you taking me now?
To our camp. The only safe place for miles.
And he'll just kind of like, from just sheer exhaustion, probably just pass out again.
Okay, yeah, totally. So it fades to black for him, and then when he wakes up, he's in what looks like some sort of tent. There's like logs, like almost like ironwood, like the deep desert sort of logs that have been shaped to hold it up. There are ropes holding it up. So he's in this sort of old style tent. It's a little warm in here, because in the desert, buildings tend to hold in the warmth, and it's sort of radiating off the earth. But he feels a sort of a damp coldness sort of pressing onto him. It's now a little lukewarm, but it's still a little bit colder than the room feels. And he sees that there's a basin of water nearby to him. His bandages, he can tell, has been changed. Obviously, it's no longer the crappy clothing bandages that he'd ripped off of his own clothes. It's now, in fact, what looks like a little bit better medicinal bandages. There's sort of a smell coming from it, very herbal smell, that sort of becomes pungent and overtakes his nose for a second. Like kind of when you're around the medicinal herbs, or like what is it, Vicks Vapor Rub? How there's that
Yeah.
potent smell. Yeah, it's kind of like that sort of very medicinal, overwhelming smell. He feels weak, but it seems like he's been, like, they've fed him water or something, because he feels at least a little bit better, but still in pain. There's a slight amount of pain, but the pain is not as sharp or as intense as it once was.
Can he get up?
He can weakly sort of struggle up to his sitting up, and then if you want, he swings his legs over to the side of the sort of bed. It's more like, those like cots that you get that are like two poles and thing. It's more like that, but it's been padded with cloths and furs and things to be a little bit more comfortable.
So yeah, he'll attempt to get up and move around and try and find someone to talk to.
Okay. It is a bit of a struggle. He is fatigued and weakened, but he's able to get to his feet. And walk. He's not jumping for joy or anything like that, but he's able to
No.
walk to the tent flap that he can see and sort of open it up, and immediately there's this light shining in. He realizes at least a day, perhaps, or more has passed, because now it's like uh, it's daylight out. Um, so perhaps maybe a full day has passed of him sleeping. He's unsure.
So he'll look around and see if he can find someone to speak to.
Yeah,
And
there's a person at a fire right outside of the tent that he's at who seems to be cooking something in a large basin over the fire that's hanging by chain and a little like hook thing that comes up, like a camping pot sort of thing.
are there sitting areas right around the fire?
There are like
Do they have?
rocks and things that people brought over, and crappy looking chairs that are also kind of you know um, that are like hides and furs spread across like two poles or something like that. You know what I mean? How there's like the legs that crisscross, and then they'll have it between the two areas, so it like your weight holds you down, kind of a thing, and it stays sitting up. Like camping chairs, basically,
Mhm.
like a primitive form of camping chairs, basically.
So he'll use like all of his strength and kind of any sort of prop, anything that he can prop himself up against to help him
Mm-hmm.
traverse over to an
Mm-hmm.
area where he can kind of sit by the fire and talk to this person.
The person hearing the steps turns around and is like, "Oh, let me let me help you there," and they come walking over. They seem they're very like muscled. They seem very very strong, and as they turn to look at you, you realize that they have feminine features. um, but you recognize the blade on the back of their belt. This was one of the people that brought you here. Their face is a little dirty from where their goggles, like that sort of like snow sort of tan line you get from wearing goggles and a face mask. They sort of have that. It's a little darker on their chin than it is where their eyes are, sort of a thing. And it's a little bit more dirty, that you presume from the wind of the desert and the sand. And they
Yeah.
come over and they grab your arm, and basically help support you and find you into a chair nearby the fire. And as you get closer, you smell food that smells amazing. Smells like some sort of stew, perhaps. Um, and as you sort of push yourself forward to peek, you realize it's not really a stew. They probably aren't wasting too much water. It's more like a kind of stir fry with a little bit of moisture in there, just to keep it mixing. But it seems like it's mostly probably a mixture of oil and flavor, and like meats and what seasonings they can afford out here, with, of course, a vast amount of mushrooms, because mushrooms being one of the biggest things that Duskfall, which is the city presumably nearby. You're not sure where you are, but yeah.
Um, he'll kind of think for a second and kind of he looks like he's trying to think about what kind of questions he wants to ask because he's in a lot of pain, so he doesn't know how much time he's going to have
Mm-hmm.
to kind of phrase these things comfortably.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of just looks up at her and asks, "Do you know what happened?"
She looks at you. I I can't say that I do. Um, Me and my friends found you. Um, Odo and Val are their names. They're out hunting right now, but um, yeah, we found you on the train tracks. We heard the explosion from some distance away. We presume there was some sort of explosion or some malfunction of the train. We found the fragments and pieces that were left nearby, um, to where you were, or at least within a mile or so. Um, We wouldn't have noticed you when we went towards the fragments if it hadn't been for you screaming. Um, but we didn't find anyone. It looks like something went wrong on the train. Something happened. Fire, obviously, because there are many of the pieces were charred and burned. I'm not, one of those engineer types, so I couldn't speak to whatever it was that happened. But I can tell you that it's a miracle that you survived.
I
However
was
you did.
traveling with my family, and I'm wondering if you might have found other survivors along the way.
It was your family that you were with? We found other bodies, but they were too badly burned to tell. I'm sorry if that was your family.
What, how much time has passed
It's
since you
been
brought me here?
3 days. You've been in and out for some time talking about some person.
How far away are we from Duskfall?
About a week by foot. A little longer if we take our time.
Are you heading that way?
Eventually, yes. Is that where you would plan to go, to Duskwall?
That's where we were heading.
Well, knowing the trains, I know that the train obviously has probably already arrived at Duskwall. People have investigated whatever happened there. And, perhaps it was an accident, so people may come looking for you, but I'm unsure if they'll look out here for you. I hope for your sake, friend, that the bodies we found weren't your family. Whoever they were, I hope peace for them. But
Can you describe them to me?
as I said, they were too badly burned, covered in rubble,
Did
fragments
they
and
look like
pieces.
children?
It was hard to tell. Some of them were covered in pieces, and we weren't able to see underneath them. Perhaps they could have been children. Um, I I understand. I have to be honest. I can't say that I understand what you're going through, friend. And I wish you. I hope that that wasn't your family that we found, but I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. The bodies had been the pieces that we found had been gnawed into by the creatures that live out here in the wild. So they had been burned, and then days later the creatures came, birds and other things. It would have been hard to say.
So I guess now the only people who might have answers are in Duskfall.
Probably. Perhaps your family wasn't in the train cart with you when the accident happened.
I have to be honest, I find it hard to hold on to hope that they're alive. But at the same time, when I hear things like that, it's hard to just dismiss it. I thank you for saving me and bringing me here and obviously treating my wounds, but when we go to Duskfall, I fully intend to seek out these answers.
I understand.
I think I need some more rest.
Yeah. I was going to say it's a week healthy. You being in the condition you're in, you're not going to be able to travel the miles and miles that we travel in a day. You're going to need more time. But we'll get you there. As I said, we are heading that way. We'll do what we can to get you that direction. So your character heads to bed, falling asleep. Back into the tent, lays down. Darkness takes him. And he wakes up sometime later, and it's nothing but darkness. And he's unsure if he's in a dream or if he's awake, and hears the faint calls of what seems like animals. But then the noises change. The familiar ringing of what we might presume would be coyotes, and then the sound changes at the end to sound something not quite the same, something darker perhaps, something monstrous perhaps. And in the distance, he can hear cries and screaming that sound familiar. He hears, "Help! Help us! Zacharias, help us! Zacharias, are you out there?"
He'll go to the voices.
So he gets up, traveling out the tent. He starts heading through the camp, and it seems like everyone's asleep. The fire is slowly sizzling. There's a tiny bit of smoke fading from it as though people have gone to bed. And he starts heading, and as he gets heading out of the camp, he notices that there are these poles set into the ground with vast carvings across them. And as he is heading towards past these poles, this ring around the camp that seems to be created. He doesn't quite understand what they are. Perhaps torches that aren't lit. Perhaps maybe they were lit and they've gone out since time. And as he's heading out of the camp, he goes to take a step out, and then he hears the yelling again. "Zacharias, help us! Zacharias!" And he feels a hand grab him from behind. Someone grabs him by the wrist, and he sees Vandra standing there looking at him saying, "Don't. Stop."
But they're calling me.
That's not who you think it is. If that is,
how do they know my name?
The creatures out here feel your pain. They see into your darkness. They see your desires. The smartest and most powerful of them use it to hunt you. If you go out there now, you won't come back. And you'll never know the truth about your family. She lets go of your wrist. But the choice is yours.
He'll turn and bury his face in his hands.
She puts one hand on his shoulder. There's a vast world out there, Zacharias. Oh, she doesn't actually know your name, so she wouldn't say Zacharias. Sorry. There's a vast world out there, friend, that no one understands. Creatures, spirits, always hunting. I understand that it causes you pain. I'm sorry for that. But just like you hear cries in the night of your family, I too hear my husband out there. But he's been dead for years. Come, have some food, she says, as he's crying, and she's trying to comfort him.
And he'll just kind of take whatever guidance is offered at this moment.
So she brings you to the fire. She brings Zacharias to the fire. She takes the cold leftovers of the meal from the night before out and places it into a sort of bowl for him, giving it to him. Although it may be cold, it's still good. He at this point, it seems like his palate has been living on presumably mush of some type, maybe mushed mushrooms or something of that nature. So it tastes quite good comparatively. But you find yourself in the presence of this woman, and she sits in silence with you. She doesn't pry or prod. She doesn't ask you a question. She just lets you sit there, understanding, almost like that sense that she too knows what it's like to be where you are. And she knows perhaps that if it's something you want to talk about, that you'll talk about it. In silence, you both sit for a time. And unless there's something that Zacharias wishes to say, that we'll just move on from that night.
I think he'll probably, kind of in a naive way, not understand kind of like that silence and where it comes from is this place of understanding. So he might ask what happened to her husband.
Okay. She'll sort of just be sitting there quietly when he asks. And sets on her bowl. Looks towards Zacharias. In Duskfall and other cities, those without wealth suffer, and sometimes they take chances or opportunities in order to get ahead if they can. My husband made the wrong sort of deal, and I was with him at his side. We both agreed, and we both went through with our plan. But we were caught. Let's just say we were doing something that wasn't considered incredibly legal. We were caught. And we were both sent to Iron Hook Prison. And although I survived the rigors of working in the labor camps and the treatment there, my husband grew sick and weakened and eventually passed. After his demise, after he passed, I was offered an opportunity to leave Iron Hook and head into the vast wastelands known as the Deathlands, where we are now. You see, Iron Hook has a deal that if you can survive so many trips to a place of their choosing, they will provide you your freedom. And so I did. I didn't care. I had no hope. I just wanted payback for what had been done to my husband. And in the vastness of the wastelands, I thought I found him. I heard his voice. But I had to realize in time that he was gone. And it's just me. But now I have my freedom, and I try to help others. There are many others who still suffer in Iron Hook, and who are given the opportunity to survive the wastes. And so I try to find those who are willing, those who are not in and of themselves evil people, but good people forced into bad circumstances. And I try to help them. Try to help them learn to survive out here. Because in truth, when Duskfall sends you out, as we were, you can't really return. You can come back in small doses. But you're forever marked. She says, and then she pulls back one of her sleeves, and you see the mark of the IH basically branded into her flesh on her forearm, like right here. You can see it burned, singed onto her. And she moves her sleeve back and continues eating.
How do you cope with it?
With my husband dying?
Yeah.
I realize that I'm one person against a vast system who preys upon the weak and the poor. And I know that I can't change it, no matter how much I wish I could have. So I hope that perhaps one action I do will help change someone else's life. But it's been, you can see on her face as she starts to get a tiny bit uncomfortable, and you can see the emotions rising to the front, kind of a thing, and she's trying to hold them in. But I need more sleep, and we're gonna pack up camp and see how far we can move with you tomorrow. So make sure to get some rest, okay?
Thank you.
She stands up, putting her bowl down, and heads off to one of the tents.
Zacharias will wander about the camp for a little while before going to the cot and laying there.
Okay.
Kind of stewing on things a little bit.
So, when he eventually finds sleep, we're just going to sort of move through these next several days and weeks. Eventually, Zacharias finds rest, and then the next morning they pack up the camp and they're on their way. And they find that, although Zacharias might be weak, his willpower, I presume, is pushing him on, so he pushes himself. And in time, days turn into weeks, and weeks pass. They eventually find themselves outside the vast lightning towers surrounding Duskfall. They can be seen for miles almost, and you've always seen them in the distance, but it's hard to make out quite what they are without light. And as you find yourself there now, weeks having passed, conversations having been shared between you and these Deathland scavengers, they've spoken to you about the truth of this world that was changed by a cataclysm 1,000 years ago, how creatures and ghosts and wraiths, how monsters exist both as things of our nightmares and people that we walk by every day, and how just because at least from their opinion, just because you enter into the safety of the city does not mean you're not surrounded by monsters. The thuggish nature of the city, the corruption, it's a sickness they feel. And that's why they choose to live out here and do what they can for others that choose to live out here, to escape that sickness. And you see that they have a sort of, they live off of the land in a balanced way, taking what they can, finding things where they can, and in trade, when they return to cities like Duskfall, they trade those things for currency and resource that they then use to buy more goods and things that they need to fix their tools or their weapons, or bartering and trading in that way. And as you arrive at Duskfall, they let you know that you should just be able to come in through the doors. You might fall under scrutiny, dressed the way that you are, or you would have. In the weeks that have traveled on, they've offered you clothes that they had, extra clothing that they had, so you look more like a Deathland scavenger. They say that these clothes should be able to help you enter the city, and after entering, that you should change your clothes to fit in better. Otherwise, if people see you walking around as a scavenger in this way, it's going to draw eyes and questions. And Vandra, as you find yourself as the gates, there's this sort of silence leading up to that moment. There's sort of a friendship that's formed between you and Vandra ever since that night that you had. Vandra has spoken to you about their experience with ghosts and wraiths. They've talked to you about the ritual sticks, the engraved sticks that they use to ward off spirits, being something that other Deathland tribes have done, very similar to how tribes in other continents of the world use, and how they learned these things through their teaching them when they met people from those places in the world, how the Aruvians, survived, how the Dagger Isles survived, how all the other countries have survived without the lightning towers until they eventually had them. Belief, faith, superstition, that sort of thing. And in these times, you've started to understand that the wraiths aren't just nightmares. Sometimes, very rarely though, ghosts and things are capable of thought. They're not just mindless machines wishing for vengeance and death. Sometimes they are calculating. Sometimes they are manipulative, as you saw in your experience with them calling out your name, making them think it was your family. There's a lot of things that you learned that you would carry on with you from your time with Vandra, and as I said, a friendship had formed. But as you find yourself as the gates, Vandra enters with you and the rest of the scavengers, and immediately goes off to talk to a person. She turns to you and simply shakes your hand, wishes you well, and says, if you ever need anything, I come back usually about once a month. Usually on the last day of the month I'm here, at least for a day or two. If you ever need me, look for me. I'll be near this area of town.
Hopefully, after getting settled, I'll be able to repay your kindness.
No need, friend. Just pay it forward. Perhaps, the next lost soul that you find, you'll help out in some way.
I'll keep that in mind.
Okay.
Thank you again.
Of course. Otto and the other Deathland scavengers you've been traveling with, wish you well, shaking your hand, saying that they hope good things for you, and it's been nice meeting you. And if you ever want to join them, you're welcome. That sort of thing.
And, I'll take it under advisement.
They wish you well. Otto especially says, hey, I hope you find the answers you're looking for, friend.
I hope so too.
Yeah. And as you part ways, you find your way into Duskmole. You, under Vandra's, recommendation, you take what money Vandra had given you, because she gave you a small purse. You find in your pocket that when Vandra said goodbye to you, they had slipped a small silver purse into your pocket, a small bag, enough to probably get you some goods and some food and probably a place to stay until you got on your feet. And when you find it, you kind of chuckle to yourself, maybe. And what do you do?
First things, sure. He will probably go and look for clothing.
Okay.
More suitable to him being in this area.
Okay. So you find some, not to say you're not looking for the highest quality clothing, you're just looking for stuff to sort of blend in. So you travel to, some of the shop areas that you can find. You start looking for clothing. You find simple, rugged clothing that looks like workers' clothes, perhaps. Is that the sort of thing you're looking for? Something to blend into the vast population? Oh, perfect. So you spend a few of the silver. It's not too much for the clothes. You spend some time to find a place, maybe a bathhouse or something like that. For another silver, you're able to clean up, or at a barber, perhaps, and they sort of clean up your beard you got going on, that sort of thing. Um, they clean it up. You're able to get on the fresh clothing, and you at this point look more or less like just the average person that walks through Duskfall. Um, you start traveling through the city, um, and I presume you're looking for your friend Connor. That's who was one of your dear friends here that you'd planned to meet up with in Duskfall when you arrived. Is that correct?
No. That would be Clyra. But
Clyra, right.
I
Clyra, your
think
childhood friend. Sorry, I got the
I
names
think he'd
confused.
probably first try to go to the authorities at the train station.
Oh, okay, okay. So he heads to the train station, the area in the night market where the train station comes in, and where the Ministry of Preservation, who oversees the trade in trains in town, is. And as he um, enters into the area and comes into the train station and their headquarters, etc., he's greeted by the train station worker who sells people tickets. Um, and they're like, "Hello, can I help you?"
I have recently discovered that there was a incident with the trains not some time ago. I had family aboard that train, and I'm wondering if they survived.
Um, I don't know what you're talking about, friend, says the man behind the teller. There was no problem with the trains. They've been perfect round the clock.
So there was no train some days ago that came in with
No, can't say that there was.
damage of any kind?
Our trains are perfectly safe, sir.
I kind of scratch his head and kind of wander off for a second. Try to think about it logically.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of thinking that he might be in a like a state of maybe he had just imagined the last few days or whatever. He'll try to get to Clyra.
Okay. So um he heads to the area of town, the docks, where Clyra owns a tavern. A friend of his that he had known from some years ago, who settled down eventually, also being of wealthy, intent. They hadn't seen each other in years, but he was one of the people that, Zacharias wanted to seek out upon his arrival and see how they were doing. Um, and he heard that she had purchased a tavern in not the nicest section of town, mind you. Being from a wealthy family seemed rather weird. But so he eventually finds his way to that portion of town. And he's walking through the areas known as the docks, where vast amounts of Leviathan hunter ships are, and dockers and sailors and fishermen and all sorts of things. Um, and as he's found his way across town from the night market to the docks, he's noticed that there seems to be some sort of person that has been following him now since his time at the train yard. It seems perhaps the questions that he was asking drew some suspicion or something. And he notices that there seems to be a person dressed in somewhat regular clothes has been following him. Perhaps they're just going to the same direction as him. But he has noticed that through the vastness of town, he has, every time he stops at a street and looks back and looks around to cross, make sure there's no cabbies or something like that, he notices the same person is in fact following him.
So he will kind of duck off and kind of hide a little bit and keep an eye on this individual as they come closer, and maybe try to hide and see if he can wait until this person gets closer.
Okay.
Try to identify him. Maybe there's someone familiar.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm imagining he's getting that vibe of maybe there was a cover up.
Okay. So he ducks around a corner down into an alleyway for a second, sort of sitting out of sight behind, we'll say, like some trash can sort of dumpster things, right? Some boxes and stuff like that. And the person comes around the corner and looks down, doesn't see him, and then starts running down it to try and figure out where he went. Runs past his little hiding spot here to where he's like right past Zacharias. And he now sees the man. He seems to be, wearing sort of normal person clothes, like as though he might have been a blue collar worker himself. But you also notice that he has something in his hand, like a weapon or something, and he's running now, and he's pulled it out now that he hasn't found him, and he doesn't notice you hiding there.
Are there any weapons nearby?
No, you just see trash. I mean, you could turn something into a weapon, like perhaps like a broken leg of a chair, or something like that.
Like a heavy object, maybe.
Yeah, there's like boxes and stuff set aside. They seem to be outside of a door, like some old boxes that got thrown out or something. Some broken boxes, maybe some old furniture. You're in the docks, so there's lots of ships are built in this area, and so there's like lots of random boxes for trade and resources. And sometimes if like fruit goes bad, people just like throw it in its crate like around a corner or something.
Zacharias would probably grab the nearest, heaviest, sturdiest item that he can find and try to sneak up on the guy and club him on the back of the head.
Okay, so Zacharias comes up behind this guy as he's running. The guy sort of stops running because he doesn't see him, and then all of a sudden, wham! Right over the top of the head. The guy goes cascading to the ground, hitting the ground, landing on the cobblestones. He's sort of like is now on his back, like sort of blinking, like what the hell just happened, And he like reaches to his head, a little blood is coming down. He quickly sort of pushes himself up onto his feet, and then you can see in his hand now he has a knife, and he's just like he's looking at you like he's got really intense eyes, but he's like having a hard time focusing, and he's like 4 or 5 feet from Zacharias, like he's like trying to figure out if he's gonna come at you or not, still sort of struggling to stand up.
I don't take kindly to people following me with knives. What do you want?
What's your name?
Don't remember.
Give me your purse.
Don't have one.
Don't lie to me. Give me your money.
I came in with the scavengers and spent what I had on these clothes.
All I can tell you, bud, is you're asking the wrong sort of questions. In the wrong sort of place. And sorry, but this is the way it's gotta be. And he says, like, he starts to like sort of gain his footing, and he's like coming at you now real slow, like he's ready. He's gonna force you to fight him, right?
All right. I'm gonna try to take him off balance since he's on the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
Try to force him to make steps backwards blindly.
Okay. So you're in like like the end of the alleyway led to a stairway down and stuff. So you're gonna try to force him to be blind, and hopefully he
I'm gonna
trips
try to rush him on the stairs to force him backwards.
Yeah. So you run at him, and you go to like push him, right? And as you're pushing him, he sort of swings up and he catches you right in the rib, hitting you a little bit with the knife, and he like jabs you a bit, but you push him and he goes cascading down the stairs, just falling. You hear the breaking of bones when he's hitting the stairs, bam, 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 and then he lands at the bottom. Blood pouring now from his wound. His arms seem broken. He seems like he's completely unconscious, and you realize the knife is stabbed into your side, stuck there.
So I'll kind of wander up to him and kneel down, pull the knife out with all my strength, and just
blood coming off of it. Yeah.
Kind of hover it over his throat
Mm-hmm.
and ask him, what were the wrong questions?
You look at him as you stand over him, and you see that his eyes are wide, and he's just like, and it seems like he's falling unconscious from bleed out. You hear down the alleyway someone yelling, "That man's got a knife! That man just killed that man! Whoa!" You know, they're yelling, and then they're like, "Call the blue coats! Call the blue coats!"
So I will hop to and get to it.
Okay.
What's kind of nearby that I could?
You're in the docks area of town, and you know Clyra's like several blocks away from you is probably the closest place that could be safe if Clyra's willing to help you. You're not sure.
I'll take some of the cloth from the old the scavenger like clothing, and kind of hold it up to the wound in my side
Okay.
and run towards Clyra's.
Okay.
Hopefully not dripping too much blood.
Yeah. So you kind of like tie it off a little bit, trying to stop the bleeding. You're holding it, and you just start running. And you're running down the street, and you hear yelling in the distance. You start to hear whistles, and you're heading block by block. Your adrenaline's going. You're huffing and puffing. You're starting to like you feel the blood loss starting to set in. You know, like you're just barely like at this point having gained your strength back from your previous wounds, and now you're wounded again. And then you're starting to feel wheezy, and then eventually you see in the distance, like a block away now, is the tavern you had heard about. It. You think you're in the right area, and when you get around there, you notice there's a bunch of blue coats standing out there, like talking with someone. You're like, oh shit. And what are you thinking? What do you do?
Where are they standing? Are they
They're
standing
standing
up?
towards like the front door area, like they're just chatting and talking with some sailors and stuff like that.
Am I looking at like the front of
Yeah,
the? Okay.
yeah. Like you
So
came around through an alleyway, and you're looking at the front of Clyra's tavern.
I'll go around the back and see if there's a door or a window in.
Okay, yeah. So you head around the back, and you notice that there is sort of a service entrance, an area where they probably pick up goods and things like that, but it is currently locked.
I kind of knock on the door a little bit.
You knock. You don't hear anything. You don't hear anyone responding. It is very loud in the streets. The streets are bustling with footsteps and chatter and things. You still hear the whistles off in the distance, blocks away now.
Kind of bang on the door a little bit.
Okay. It doesn't seem like anyone's answering.
Um, is there a way onto the roof?
Yeah, but you'd have to climb. It's like a 2-story building, and in your state, holding your wound, it would be hard to climb. As you're sitting there thinking, you're starting to feel the haziness start to take you. Like you're starting to feel that blood loss setting in. And you hear a whisper. You hear a voice. Just open it.
Reach out and try to open the door.
And as you reach out, the lock of the door goes and unlocks, and the door opens. And you're now in an empty, dark room in the back of the tavern. The door, as you step through it, shuts behind you and relocks, but you didn't lock it. You sort
Okay,
of lose
so
yourself. Oh, go ahead.
he's disoriented now,
Mm-hmm.
and also with like this disbelief, like maybe he's hallucinating.
Mm-hmm.
So he's gonna try to smack himself
Mm-hmm.
and see if that orients him any.
Mm-hmm.
But then he'll try to find Clyra, however we can.
He starts walking towards the door, and he sees the blue coats, or a few of them are inside, and he peeks and sees them. And he feels, as he goes to open the door, he's like, maybe they won't notice me, maybe I can get Clive's attention. He feels a hand wrap around his mouth and pull him backwards into the room. And then he hears a whisper in his ear, "Don't go out there, friend."
So
Don't yell, don't speak. If you do, you'll draw the bluecoats in. They're looking for you. If
he's kind of gonna have like this sense of fear, because this is a very frightening experience for probably anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But he'll kind of find a corner where it's darkest and probably out of the way and try to just make himself small and apply more pressure to his wound.
Mm-hmm. As he steps away, the hand lets go of him, and the person, a hooded person, seeming like they're in their late 40s, maybe early 50s, steps away. An old, sort of grizzled man steps away. I saw that you would come. For now, friend, he says in a whispered voice. Sit. Clara will find you in time. But you must wait here.
Who are you?
Eventually you will know my name. We've spoken once before, a long time ago. Just trust that I know. We will speak again, friend. Your family's death was not an accident. Your family's death was planned. Your death too. Clara, I believe, will help you. Hide here. But if you go out there now, the bluecoats will find you, and you'll disappear just like the rest.
Zacharias, just now with a little bit of confirmation to like those little thoughts in the back of his mind, is he's just gonna stew on it, and this anger just kind of comes forward, allowing him to focus a little bit on just staying hidden, and hopefully Clara will come and find him.
The man drops his hood for a second, and you see a familiar face of your friend Connor that you knew from a long time ago, who was a bit older than you. But he seems grizzled, and his skin seems aged, like he's experienced something, or age has not been kind to him. He gives you one of these, like this. Shh. And then he reaches over for the door, unlocks it, opens it, and walks out, shutting it behind him. And you're left there in the darkness for a moment, in the back of Clara's tavern, after your experiences through the desert, the loss of your family. Left with the knowledge from a friend of yours from time long ago that your family's death is, in fact, part of some sort of conspiracy or something. And I think that's where we will end the scene, friend. Unless you have more that you want to say.
No, that's good.
Okay. Awesome scene, man.